Good morning, Grid Connections listeners, and welcome back to Grid Connections, the podcast where clean energy, electric vehicles, and the grid converge. As always, this episode is brought to you by Grid Connections Consulting. In today's episode, we're joined by Gabe Klein. He's the former head of the U.S. Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. And as he announced just yesterday, he is now the chair of the advisory board at Paren. Along with him, we'll be joined by, once again, Lauren McDonald, the chief analyst at Paren, as well as Florent Breton, the CEO. We dive into the future of EV charging infrastructure, standardization, and data transparency, unpacking how Paren is tracking 3 million charging sessions every week and helping charging providers, automakers, and governments optimize reliability, pricing, and location. Gabe shares why he joined Paren's advisory board and how lessons from the federal level are now accelerating private sector innovation. Lauren and Florent explore the shift to Charging 2.0, the rise of retail-led networks, and how standardized data will shape the next billion charging sessions. If you work in electric vehicles or just care about a better charging experience, this episode is a must listen. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share this episode with someone who'd find it valuable as well. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. It helps us bring more episodes like today's to you. And be sure to sign up for our newsletter. All of this can be found in today's show notes. With that, enjoy. I am joined again by the team from Paren. I've got not only just our returning face, Lauren McDonald, but we're also joined by Florent and Gabe Klein. So for any of those who may not be familiar with what only Paren is doing and having a big impact in the space, I think it'd be just kind of great real quickly if each of you can go around and just give a quick summary of your background, and then we'll kind of get into some of the big news that we have to share about one of the special guests we have on today and the influence with the Paren team. So I will just pick Florent. I'm looking at you first. So let's have you kick it off.
Sure. Yes. Thank you so much, Chase, for having me and having us, over at Great Connections. We're a big fan here. So I'm French American, hence, the accent that you'll hear, all along this recording here. I'm based in San Francisco. Also, look at the sweater if you're looking at this video here because it's 55 in the city. I'm also the CEO and co-founder of Paren. Yes, I'm sure we'll talk more about that in a minute.
Lauren, I'll let you go next.
Yeah, Lauren McDonald, chief analyst at Paren, longtime listener, many-time guest on your podcast. So excited to be back on. Background is 30 years or so in marketing, but the last 10 in the EV industry. Started a business called EV Adoption, which then last September, we're actually coming up on almost a year. Time flies. Merged the EV adoption business into Paren. Was really excited about all the data that Florent and Bill Farrow, the other co-founder, were building, and it was a perfect fit. So I joined, and as chief analyst, basically diving in and analyzing and making sense of all the amazing data we have.
Thanks, Lauren and Florent. And Gabe, thank you again for coming on today. I know you've got quite the background, but for those listening, let's if you could just share real quickly.
Sure, and thanks for having me, Chase, and all of us. So I've got about 30 years of experience now in the public and private sector. The majority actually in the private sector, lots of startups and helping companies scale, whether within companies like Zipcar or companies, or as a venture capitalist or consultant. I also wrote a book called Startup City. I wrote that book after I did 2 stints in government. One running the Washington, D.C. Department of Transportation, and one running the Chicago Department of Transportation for Adrian Penty and Emmanuel, mentioned to you guys earlier. Most recently, I was the executive director of the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation, which was spun when the bipartisan infrastructure or the IIJA was passed, with the goal of convening public and private sector and also breaking down barriers within the federal government, specifically between the Department of Energy and the Department of Transportation. The thing that excited me about that role was it was entirely new. It was entrepreneurial. It was the first time the federal government had ever attempted to bridge 2 separate federal agencies within office. So I got to work with Jennifer Granholm, the judge, Paula Trottenberg, and Dave Turk. and work with people like Lauren and Paren on the outside uh, to figure out how to make the EV charging experience the best it possibly could be. So when the office started to go in under the new administration, working with the private sector closely to continue that work was really important to me. And I think Paren is at the absolute forefront on the data side. We have OCPI and CPP, but actually taking that and unifying that data to make it useful for all the companies, for all the state governments, the city governments, and ultimately for the consumer is, I think,
Florent, Lauren, maybe you can give a little bit of the backstory. Was kind of like the vision behind launching the advisory board, and then we can speak to Gabe's kind of joining it and influence over the team, and what we're really excited to see how Paren's grown from the addition of the new team member.
Sure, absolutely. I can take it, Lauren, if you want. So we launched Paren about a year ago now, and the goal and the vision behind Paren is to create standardization in our industry. We currently have 40 to 50 charge point operators in the US. Every single one of them work in silo, and it's very hard, I mean, for drivers and for other stakeholders in the industry to access information and access it in a way that they can, make business critical decisions, or for drivers to make decisions toward the next charging stations. So we started Paren around that vision, and we have been working with charge point operators in the US and also now in Canada to access information related to not only location, but also utilization, reliability, availability, pricing, amenities, and safety. And over the last year, um, we've seen more and more charging events to the point now where we are currently tracking 3 million charging sessions on a weekly basis. And as we continue to grow, we definitely need people to help us, navigate our stage of growth. And that's why, as a startup, it is very critical for us to launch that advisory board. And that's actually a fantastic opportunity. It's a fantastic vehicle for early stage startup to bring in people of the caliber of, Gabe Klein, Garcelle Owner, and Luke Vincent. These advisor bring to the company so much expertise, so much leadership, and they can weigh in on the strategic decisions that we face. So that's the reason why, the timing was right at our stage of growth, and we're thrilled that Gabe is actually leading the initiative here.
Yeah, and Chase, I'll just add. I started tracking the NEVI program, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. It'll be actually almost 3 years, I think, next month. And in that process, I had the honor and the privilege to start interacting with Gabe and his team. And as he said, when things started to devolve in Washington with the joint office, we continued. Speaking and interacting and talking about the future of the industry, and that sort of led to actually a great meeting in DC with Gabe and the team, and we quickly saw the amazing guidance that Gabe could bring to us, not only with his expertise and experience in federal, state, local government, but his past, he was also a venture capitalist. He's started many companies and stuff. And so you bring that together, and it was, sort of the perfect fit with what we were trying to do. And lastly, really, as Gabe said, I think, he probably left out part that he joined that office, with a true belief to try to figure out how we can improve the charging experience for consumers, which is, the last couple of years had been one of the top stories, right, in the charging industry is, how bad the reliability was in the charging experience and stuff. And so this was an opportunity, as he said, to work with a company, Paren, that's basically using data to try to improve standardization and the customer experience in the industry. Because without that, we're not going to see the sort of this next wave of EV drivers taking a gamble on getting an EV.
No, I think that's a great kind of recap given the background. I guess Gabe would love to hear your side of it too, of kind of what drew you to the advisory board, especially coming from the joint office.
Yeah. Well, we envisioned the joint office originally being a 5-year office, um, sort of mirroring the bipartisan infrastructure timeline. And then we quickly realized, okay, it's probably more of a 7 to 8 year office because the president said a goal of 100,000 chargers by 2030. Not government funded chargers, but all the chargers, that were stimulated, if you will, by a multitude of efforts at the federal level as well as state, local, and private. So, we got about 3 years of our mission done. We got a ton of stuff started. The thing that was probably the proudest, there's so many things I'm proud of, but plug and charge was really, really important. Sarah Heupel and our team, our chief technology officer, worked very hard with SAE, also through ChargeX, and that has actually been coming to fruition. I sold my Tesla, got a Mercedes, pulled up to an EV go station, I had a charge point membership, and it knew me. And it recognized the charge point customer, did all the reconciliation on the back end, I plugged it in and walked away. It was amazing, and it just made me so proud. So we had a lot of different efforts going. Data is hugely important because knowledge is power. The companies out there, and there, as Fawn said, there's a multitude of them. Probably have some level of consolidation over the next few years, but there are a multitude of companies that all want to do great work. They have different amounts of resources, capabilities, technical expertise, and so forth. And so, what I'm excited about with Paren is it is in many ways picking up where we left off. We always envisioned at the end of that 7 or 8 years, the private sector is going to have to carry that. Well, they're going to have to carry it a lot sooner. They're going to have to do a lot more, a lot faster with a lot less. And that's why the data and the analysis that, like Lauren provides of that data is so valuable for these companies that want to do a better job, but don't necessarily have the data or the know how to do it. And it's because, as Faran said, they're all living in their silo with their data. Yep. And what we're able to do is take all of that data, amalgamate it, process it, enrich it, and then give it back as valuable insights. Like the other day, I went to a unnamed company's charging station, and I had no idea I was going to be paying 87 cents a kilowatt hour. That's a lot. That's a lot. It was a $40 bill to fill up my tank halfway. It would have been like $80 to $100. So that left me with a bad taste in my mouth. We know that EV charging can be so much better than filling up your tank with gas. It can be easier, faster, cheaper. And so with this information that they're providing, like the awesome expertise of Luke and Garth, and Luke and I hang out offsite with these guys, and I was just blown away. And this is the guy who built Google Street Maps. It's absolutely amazing. I have no doubt that this will become the standard for EV charging data, not replacing the existing standards, but this is the next thing to unify all of these companies data so that we can actually make the US and North America, I think, the best in the world. And in fact, last week I saw that 84% of people in the US said the EV charging experience has gotten significantly better, much higher than Europe by like 20 points, China, everywhere else. And we need to continue that.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I wanted to build on what you just said because it's actually one of the reasons why we're also launching the advisory board. If we put, things in perspective, we are at the very early stage of the adoption curve of electric vehicle, even though it doesn't feel like it in San Francisco, where we have a lot of electric vehicles, and especially in California as well. But overall, when you look, nationwide, we are still at the early phase of that. And when we are in the early phase of that, will come more challenges with the next cohort of EV drivers. Expectation will change. Maybe, as Gabe mentioned, price will be, something that will matter to more people because the next cohort might be more price sensitive. So when you look at things, there will be many more challenges coming, and the scale of it is going to be gigantic. As I mentioned before, we've seen about million EV charging sessions in 2024. We expected 140 million charging sessions in 2025, just for the US only. We expect that number to grow potentially to 1 billion by 2030. And so, we're going to see like a massive growth in the number of charging events on the public fast charging infrastructure. And when we think about that, we need to reflect on how do we make sure that we build a company, like a business to business platform that can support that type of growth and the scale as well. And that's why, leaning on people like Gabe, Luke, and Garth really can help us do that. Gabe, obviously, with his entrepreneurial background and industry expertise, and everything that he's bringing to the industry is fantastic. He can help us navigate that space. Luke, has Gabe mentioned, Luke has been the founder of Google Street View. He started Google just working with students out of Stanford, and then he scaled it to a global business. And that's the kind of experience that we need as early stage, ventures, and especially as early stage entrepreneurs. We need people who have been there and done that, and Luke can certainly do that. Now the question is, how do we make sure that our technology and our platform is adopted massively? And that's where Garth Salinger is actually stepping in. Garth has been one of the very first writing about the adoption of technologies through network effects. And we've built a fantastic relationship over the last year, and we're thrilled to have his experience helping us achieve that growth and standardization with Paren.
Yeah, that's
Chase,
Oh, I was just going to
the-
ask something to kind of pull apart a little bit more on that. And maybe you're going to go into this, Lauren, but one of the things we talked about, obviously, is kind of like the phase one, the phase two, it feels like we're almost in like the phase three of charging infrastructure, like the third kind of generation of it. And I'm kind of curious, is that a big part of what you're seeing as the value, is why all these systems can kind of work, and how parents kind of being the, I guess, is it timing is the big motivating factor? I mean, Gabe, you were just talking about a lot of the siloing, and that's definitely been an issue for a long time. Do you think the big thing is now the timing and people seeing the value in having this data more transparent? Or is there some other thing that Paren is also kind of taking advantage of that's really helping with all of this being able to be done now versus earlier or even a couple years ago?
I can step in. I
Go
was
for it.
thinking that Gabe was going to jump in. I mean, you mentioned sort of phase three, but about I don't know 12, 18 months ago, I started talking about a concept we call charging 2.0, really sort of the next phase, particularly of the fast charging industry.
You called it 2.0, but as someone who's been using chargers for over a decade, I think we've had the Blinks of the world, we've had the massive like level two, we've had all these different, not to throw anyone under the bus, but we've had so many of these generation. I mean, I feel like there was the first generation was just seeing level two, and then we
Right.
had kind of like the first generation as DCFC. But I don't. That's my at least kind of interpretation. But I agree with you that we're kind of seeing
I mean,
this final phase of it. But
if if you really wanted to break it down, yeah, we could. It might be 4.0 at this point,
yeah,
right? But what I tried to keep it, yeah, I tried to keep it simple and basically said there's sort of the old version, as
yeah,
you sort of hinted at, and really the sort of the next phase. And there's a lot of things, Chase, that sort of go into that definition. One is just the players, right? And we're seeing, companies like Walmart and Mercedes and Iona and, BP Pulse and, Sheets, Wawa, 7-Eleven, Circle K, right? Like we're seeing an entirely new phase of companies that are getting into the charging industry in a very big way. And one of the, so that's sort of the first point. It's just different companies that are well capitalized, that are massive, often global. And what's really sort of important, different about these 2.0 versus 1.0 players, Chase, is why they are in the industry, right? Most of the first sort of phase players were in it to either to sell hardware or software fees, basically to get chargers in the ground and to generate revenue from selling electricity. Well, a lot of these new players, most of these new players have completely different goals. One is in the case of the automakers that have gotten into the industry, is to sell more EVs and improve and have more control over that customer charging experience. I mean, you think about, an automaker, right? And while they don't, except for the new players like Tesla and Rivian, they don't control the dealership part of it. But they want to ensure that driver experience, because the charging is so critical to ownership in the EV. And they saw that the 1.0 players weren't actually delivering. Let's just be candid, right? And so it took them a while. They probably went kicking and screaming, but then they realized that if they wanted to sell more EVs, like Tesla learned early on, we've got to do this. But then the second part of that, Chase, is that a lot of the companies like the what we call the fuel and convenience companies, the gas stations, the travel stores, the centers like Love's and Pilot, et cetera, and the convenience store chains are seeing their gas revenue, either flatten. It's probably peaked for most of them. Maybe not in like North Dakota, but in most of the country, it's probably peaked, if not decline. And so they have to start, how do we pick up that high volume revenue? But the second piece of it is really that industry has become all about retail and stores. It's about getting people inside. And so they all realized about 18 months, 24 months ago that, EV, drivers can spend anywhere from 20 to 45 minutes plugged in, right? And so the industry now is, their number one goal for that group is how do we get people out of their cars and inside, where we can sell them, $5 cup of coffee that has like a $4 margin, and lotto tickets, and a salad and a sandwich and stuff like that. So it's sort of a very different makeup of companies. And so you add that all up, and those companies are much more interested in transparency and standardization, right? Because it's consistent with their goals of saying we've got to take this industry, pick it up, and take it to a completely another level and improve that experience. So, the old players were maybe a bit more reticent to be transparent and things like that and step up their game, and the new players are like, they're on board. They're all in on this.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. I mean, the big thing to me between kind of this generation of DC fast charging and the one before really is the business model.
Right.
And I mean, it kind of speaks to what you're talking about. Like traditional energy and gas suppliers, they don't make money on, or they make revenue. They don't make margin or real serious profit on
Yeah,
gas.
it's
And maybe Gabe, I guess wherever you're going, someone's trying to make margin when it's 80 cents a kilowatt hour. And that just is not going to be very competitive for very long.
Yeah, exactly. And I think to Lauren's point, like the consumer is coming into focus now. We had the early adopters for EVs. Many of them were Tesla owners inside, closed walled garden of charging. It's now like becoming a wide open field. Every major manufacturer either has you know, 2, 3, 4, 5 EVs there that they're selling. I think we have over 100 models now, or a whole bunch in planning. And so I think also the new folks entering the first and second generation of people building EV chargers also were obsessed with the value of their data. Everyone thinks their data is worth so much on its own. And I always say
Right.
the data is either worth everything or nothing. It sort of depends on like what you're going to do with it. And the reality is, in this time of upheaval that we're in, it's a perfect time for Paren because all of these folks actually really need to come together so that EVs are successful. GM and Ford and IM and ChargePoint, like we all have to work together. It's not about creating a whole bunch of little gardens. If you do that, you got to have each other's data. Because if you're 20 points below from a reliability standpoint, your competitor across the street, that doesn't work. And it's more valuable for you to understand why and make the experience better than it is to try to monetize your data set. And I think
Right.
that's what I see out there. Everybody understands like this is a make or break moment over the next, let's let's say 24, 36 months, we are not going to have the federal government support that we have before. We're going to have less resources even in local and state government. And so the private sector is really going to have to take it into the gear and collaborate in a way that maybe they didn't even foresee. And I think Paren was right there at that intersection saying, hey, we're here to help you facilitate it. And instead of you, California, having to say, all right, we're going to come up with this standard that everybody needs to adhere to, and then Oregon saying, no, we're going to do this different standard. It's just easier if the private sector can coalesce around what Paren's already doing. And that's what.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess for context, 100% of our listeners are EV nerds. 50% of them work in the industry, and then 50% of them just drive EVs. So for that 50% that is actually in the industry, are there any ways that Paren, I mean, obviously with these new entrants, it kind of makes a lot of sense to them to be open with their data. Is there a kind of conversation or a talking point that Paren has for those that might be a little more hesitant or have been kind of slow to be more open as to see why there is the value in kind of taking that step forward? Or has it been like, are you seeing things that work with some of these players that maybe have been traditionally a little bit slower to be open, and now they're kind of seeing the value of having a more open essentially just environment for data sharing, and then how to actually leverage that data for the drivers and themselves?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, and the feedback that we've had from different players in the industry was that they were optimizing for the outcome of their strategic decisions. And if you make strategic decision on your very own data set, you have outcome, number one. If you make strategic decision on a larger data set that represent the entire industry, you're no longer blindsided. And then the outcome number two is actually much greater than outcome number one. And that's, what they are seeing here. They are seeing that the benefit of accessing a wider set of data is actually helping them moving forward. And that has been the driving dynamics that different partners, and I'm not necessarily saying only charge point operators, but different stakeholders in the industry are embracing. You're better off if you have sufficient and standardized information in your hands. And the standardized part is actually very key because you have your very own data. Of course, like as a company operating in the space, you have your very own data. You can potentially get access to like some additional data sets, left and right. But how can you compare, the additional data sets to what you have? It takes a lot of efforts to eventually, like bring that together. And that's also where like having a standardized data set can help everybody understand where they're standing and how they can move forward. And overall, we believe that standardization will benefit the overall industry and down the road AV drivers.
And Chase, I mean, I think one of the things that we've seen in conversation is it really comes down to trust and the quality of the data. I think we Florent does a great job getting on the phone with we won't mention names, but these companies that we're talking about. And one of the things that he does is we show them data on their own network and stuff, and the feedback we get is that it's like it's within the accuracy
It
of our
matches,
data.
yeah.
Yeah, it matches their data, and so oftentimes they start off a little suspect, but then when we show them how accurate our data is, they become, where do I sign? Basically, where do we come on board? I had somebody with one of the largest charging networks text message me the other day saying basically, they had a conversation with a government organization that was talking to us, and they basically said, we hope it's your data and not somebody else's, right? Like that's I think that's one of the things that's taken a bit of time, but we're now getting to that point where people are seeing how accurate and reliable our data is, and that helps get companies that might have been reticent to go, okay, maybe we're excited about transparency before because we didn't trust the data, and
Right.
you have the most reliable data, so it is what it is, right? And so they're getting on board, and they realize that they'd rather participate with a company that's got accurate data.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. And I guess having worked in the data space previously myself, and I realize Bill isn't on today, uh,
Yeah.
this may be a more technical question, but I guess if someone is listening and they are a person that has a company that's looking at going to parent, like what do they need to think of as far as like their stack, how they have like their data warehouse to like actually make it useful? Because I mean, that's a big thing I've just seen so much anyway, is not only are these companies sometimes not through any fault of their own struggling with actually taking advantage of the data they already have, but it's that layer of how to optimize their data to actually communicate across internally and externally to then actually make it actionable. And I'm just curious if you're, yeah, go for it, Florent.
Gabe, you want to say something, from the last conversation, or
Well, I did want to say something, but actually it's probably for the next conversation. So I'll let
okay,
you
great.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, to your point, Chase, we I don't necessarily want to have like a solution to a problem that is not necessarily extremely well defined right now. People come to us and we're still at the early stage of our venture, and we want to understand. We're not saying here's a solution. You've been waiting for these for years and a decade. Here is a solution. What we want actually to do is actually work with them, understand exactly what is a pain point and how can eventually we solve that with our data. We are at a stage where we want to build the conversations and where we want to build a solution around problems that we don't know of right now, because we haven't been exposed to like every single challenges that small industry players to very large and industry leaders have been facing. And that's also why right now we want to be in that listening mode, and co-building services for the different stakeholders. Lauren mentioned charge point operators, automakers, government entities,
Yeah.
right operators, map makers. Every single one of them can benefit from standardized and rich data. Do we have a solution for every single one of them? Potentially we will. We do right now, for some of them, but we want to better understand, where is the alignment so we can provide that solution here. And that's where we need people like Gabe, who has been an entrepreneur, an investor, an industry leader, to help us, like make sense of all of that and eventually prioritize what matters the most at our stage of development.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially when you're dealing with those an automaker or a charge point operator. Their data sets and then data challenges are going to be pretty different, and trying to find that right set makes sense. So, Gabe, I'm sorry I cut you off there. What were you going to add to that?
No, I was just going to say, in addition to what Klein said, because like there's like the heavy data stuff, and there's the every system talking to every other system.
Right.
There's the work that Lauren does, and spending time with like Lauren and Bill too, and getting their insights from that data is so valuable. And so when I was even in the joint office, getting the Nevi insights was super helpful to me. And so I look through this from a few different lenses. There's the consumer, there's the state and the city, but there's the person that's in the driver's seat at charge point or EV blank or whatever. And like, you got to make business decisions. And so I think that analysis and the insights and then the iterating on the analysis and saying, okay, so you're saying that in the Southeast, reliability is lower, or we're having problems with our payment systems, or whatever the issue is, to then be able to drill down even further and figure it out, either yourself with that data or with the assistance of people at Paren, I think is really, really interesting. And I think that like whether you're the CEO or you're the director of operations or you're in charge of marketing, you're going to want to drill down into this more and more. And I think that's where like Lauren and his team and others can be very, very helpful.
Yeah,
Yeah, I guess
Chase.
to follow up that, I'm curious, Lauren, if you can share without going too far into the like secret sauce. How do you find the signal in the noise? Because there's a lot of noise in these kind of data sets.
Yeah, I mean it's actually a lot of iteration to I think Gabe's point, right? It's a
Yeah.
lot of almost sort of like trial and error. So we've Bill Farrow, the co-founder of the company, and we're working daily with our data analyst, and we're constantly looking at different sort of data sets. And it's one of those things, we're so early in sort of the market and look at these things that we oftentimes don't know what we're going to find until we sort of play with it. I'll give you a really quick answer that was just sort of mind blowing. So we were looking at a location in the southeast where there was an existing, very well known charging network, might be Tesla, and a new player came in literally within like 100 feet of that charging station, and what we saw was that the traffic basically shifted over to that new entrant. Right, we've seen. I mean, it literally took, a significant amount of sessions away from that existing one. Right, and a lot of it was pricing and brand and stuff. And in another case, we saw 3 charging stations all located next to each other, and one of them changed its pricing from flat to time of use and dropped it by like 20 cents, and had kind of a pretty significant impact on utilization, right? So part of it is just getting in and diving into the data and see kind of like how what's going on with the charge point operators and the consumers is actually sort of evolving and changing. I mean, we Gabe talked about like the 80 cents per kilowatt hour, right? And
87.
87 cents, yeah. And we're starting to see a lot of 65 cents and higher here in the US. And the road trippers are not real happy about that. Most people, like, if you do that once or twice a year, it's not a big deal.
I'm annoyed when it's in the 40s. So
yeah.
yeah.
But Europe, well, you're a road tripper, right? But
Yeah.
I always like to look ahead, to Norway, to Europe and stuff like
Yeah.
that. And Europe is starting to see price sensitivity, right? The drivers, because they're sort of well beyond us, right? We haven't generally reached that yet, but so it's going to be interesting, as the sort of this next wave comes along. Are people going to be okay with spending 70, 80 cents per kilowatt hour? And if it's the only station there, it is what it is, right? But when there's 3 charging stations all located in the same shopping mall parking lot, we're going to start seeing a lot of interesting strategies around pricing, right? It might be loyalty, might be amenities, might be a lot of different things that sort of impact that. I'll share one last sort of thing that we uncovered recently at a few stations, Chase, is that the use of time of use pricing. So the idea of there's too many people charging in the afternoon, so let's raise prices then and lower it in early and late. We're actually seeing it's not working at a lot of stations. Literally, it's not increasing the moving people to those lower prices. And it may simply be that a lot of people just have to charge when they have to charge, right? Now, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask, is that well, exactly. That's what I was going to say. Is like, honestly, looking from a driver EV perspective, even come from a combustion vehicle, there's apps like Gas Buddy or stuff like that. But people, that is the whole thing with apps. You have to open an app, yada, yada, yada. There's a lot of friction to even effectively do that. So unless you're super price sensitive, that's one thing. Now, you do have some of the automakers like Tesla and a couple others do show price and time of use and make it pretty visible to the driver easily. Yeah. But I would say with most models, they don't. So you kind of have to either show up, or maybe, once again, the EV nerds that 10% that knows all this stuff might pull out PlugShare and say, oh, this one's cheaper. And that's just not really feasible and scalable for most drivers.
Yeah,
I'm curious if there's any
answer for this. Yeah.
Well, but I guess what I'm curious is, like, can you effectively say that time of use is not being impacted because of price, or is it just truly because drivers don't know better, have that better visibility across brand, or
I'll answer that, and then Florent's gonna give you the answer to the real problem, right? And I think one, and as I've written about this, I don't think the price differential that a lot of CPOs are using is probably enough, right? If it's like 4 cents or something like that, right? 6 cents, maybe that's just not enough. Maybe it needs to be like 20 cents, 25 cents to really, really move the needle, right?
Well, then there's also what is at the site. Like if one
right? I
on
mean,
one side of the street has like bathrooms and all that stuff, I'll probably go there if it's 10 to 15 cents more. If it's
right,
no
right.
different, then I'm going for the cheaper one.
Yeah, I mean, if it's like 6 cents or something like that,
Yeah.
what is that? It's going to be like whatever, 50 cents or whatever, right? I think it's got to be sort of significantly different. But Florent, why don't you you talk about?
Sure. What I wanted to say is that it really depends and shows what people are optimizing for.
Yeah.
10, 12 years ago, people were optimizing for location. Where do I find a charging station? No one had any idea of where to find a charging station. So then we started seeing, crowdsource app that were enabling people to share, oh, there is a charging station right behind that parking lot. And that was one of the reasons why we've seen, this app flourishing, just because that was what people were trying to get, access to information where location stations are located. We are now seeing that, you know, the charging experience is evolving with many more attributes into the equation. Not only they want to know still where it's located, but how much power
Reliability.
is it,
Yeah.
the reliability, the pricing, and everything else. That's why we're seeing like that way more data, are needed for drivers to make a decision. Drivers or their car or their mapping system. And so it's very fascinating to see that the evolution of which we are at right now, the adoption curve of electric vehicle, lead us to a richer and experience for drivers, and the need for better and better data and more statistical approach as well to data.
Yeah, and yeah, go ahead, Gabe.
I was just going to quickly say, because like yesterday, I went to a Tesla charger for the first time with my Mercedes, realized the adapter wouldn't work, ran to another lady with a Mercedes, just like mine. She had just figured out it was her third Tesla charging station that she'd been to. Very interesting conversation. Then I go up to use a Shell recharge station. It turns out there were two across the parking lot from each other, both dual port. I go to the one. I could see on the little, there's a big screen, a little screen. On the little screen, I could see that there was some error, but I thought, okay, the big screen's working. I spent 15 minutes trying to start a charge. I didn't realize there was one right across the parking lot that I could have used. So, like, we need customers to be able to say, like, the number one thing that's important to me is that it's working. Number two is that the price is, or the location, maybe this is me, is within 3 or 4 miles of where I need to go. Number three, I would like the price to be between this and this. Ideally, and Paren can actually deliver that information in a customized format, whether it's in a car, whether it's to my phone. But right now, it's like I had the Mercedes app open, I had the Tesla app open, I had the Shell Recharge app open, and I had the plug charger. I mean, it's too much. And like, here I am, the guy that directed the joint office, and I can't figure it out. Well, that's where Paren comes in. We need to simplify it for people. And it will get better. I think it'll be the best in the world in a few years, but we're not there yet.
And I know, Gabe, you have to jump, in at the top of the hour here. Chase, if that's okay, can we, ask a little bit like Gabe on, what's going to be your role as, chairman of the advisory board here, and maybe, we can also share about what's coming up next and where we're going to be focusing on.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. I think I don't know if you're able to stay on a little bit later, Lauren, because there were a couple of questions. If you're able to, that'd be great. But yeah, I want to be respectful of your time, Gabe. So let's focus on that right now.
Sure, sure. Well, my goal is to be the master of all time, space, and dimension, but I know I will fall short. So
You got to
I
aim
think that's
high.
yeah, I think that's like a Steve Martin quote from '78. I'm dating myself, but no, the reality is like I want to help give insights to the team at Paren, which is an excellent team, by the way, and they're humble, right? Like they know what they know what they don't know, and that's how you grow a startup and you get feedback. And I think myself and the other two folks on the team are all very different in terms of our diverse background, but that we can give them a lot of feedback to figure out how to iterate on this data, how to make it better, how to enrich it in some ways, or allow it to be enriched, maybe even using AI. There are some things that can be done to accelerate, I think, the EV industry on the whole. Something that government was working with the private sector to do, and now companies like Paren are going to have to function in bringing together a lot of different players to get them to work together, which they are already succeeding, I should note. Um, and filling in the gaps, even on standardization, working with standards organizations like SAE and others to say, hey, like maybe we need to go to another level in terms of standardization. Maybe it needs to be a certified standard or not. And then I think also that myself and the other two gentlemen, Luke and Garth, can help from the standpoint of accelerating their growth. Right? Garth has decades of experience in innovation and business, network effects, figuring out from that perch that he has at Stanford, companies that are successful become successful, how to get there. And then, Luke is sort of like a tech genius. I applied him with Mezcal in Mexico and tried to figure out the secrets for all his technical success, whether it's working with AVs and building that Lyft, working at Meta, Google, Street View and Maps is something I rely on every single day. And just like that, EV charging is going to be something going forward. Everybody in this country, we're not going to be Cuba. It's not like we're going to be the only country with old gas-powered vehicles. We're all going to be driving EVs, or we're going to be in EV mobility services or e-bikes. And so the work that Paren's doing to unify the information and the standard is going to be absolutely crucial. It'll be ubiquitous. We're all going to use it. And so I think people like Luke have the ability, and my job as the chair is to make sure that what Laurent and Lauren and Bill and the rest of the team, what they need from the advisory board, that we're able to get both strategic, but also tactical. Hey, do you know somebody at Google that can help us on X, Y, or Z? So that's how I hope to basically be that filter and make sure that we work as fast as humanly possible, because there's no time to waste.
No, that's great to hear, and I really appreciate that, Gabe. That's kind of awesome to see that, because you're totally right. This is definitely a resource and where the industry needs to go. And someone of your expertise to kind of step in and provide that's really great to see. And I was always really impressed with what your team was doing, and now it just seems like it's going even faster further. So that's great.
Thanks, Chase. Thanks for that. Yeah. And on behalf of all the folks that joined us, thanks to you for what you do. Thanks to Paren. It's a bunch of really mission-driven people, 50 people, and they're as excited as I am to see companies fill these gaps for what the future holds. As I said on LinkedIn, LFGL.
Love to hear
Thank
it.
you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye,
Gabe.
Gabe.
Bye. Yeah, Lauren, I'm just kind of curious. I know we've covered a lot today, and there's a lot of cool things, obviously, that the team at Paren's doing, and having Gabe and some of these other announcements your team's been making lately is just awesome to see. I think also, to be respectful of your times, we'll try and keep this short, but I'm always just curious to hear what you're kind of seeing or any interesting trends in the EV industry right now, especially to charging, that maybe we haven't covered yet, because that's something I'm always getting questions about our guests or from our listeners about what they're seeing in the industry. And there's a lot of headlines, and there's usually not as many facts versus what is shown in those with the reality of the industry.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different things. I'll talk about a couple. One is, one of the challenges that you heard about the fast charging industry for years was low utilization, right? Oftentimes it was in, sort of single digits and stuff. And, over the last year or so, it's just like exploded. And we're now seeing markets where, during what we call peak time or prime time in the afternoons and stuff, like there's stations that are, 80, 100%, right? As far as being, utilized and stuff. And I met with a senior executive from one of the largest charging networks in the U.S. just last month, and he said we're actually having serious congestion problems at a lot of our stations right now. This is a network like several of the major ones. They have stations in like virtually every state and every part of the country, so it's really a sort of a portfolio. So their stations in Bismarck, North Dakota are not being tapped out, right? They're very low utilization, but their stations in New York, Miami, San Francisco, LA, etc., are literally, there are queues. There are lines wait up at sort of the middle of the day. So one of the problems that's emerging, and why you see like California has the highest adoption of that time of use rate, right? Whether it's working or not, as we discussed earlier, is a different point. But a lot of the major charging networks are now having to grapple with how do we improve that customer experience by shortening wait times, right? And so we're going to see a lot of innovation, and it's everything from pricing and amenities and different things, and loyalty rewards to try to change people's behavior. But it's also bigger stations, right? Which is a quick transition to one of the other trends, right? I posted on LinkedIn about this. I think it was last week, right? We're now seeing that we're headed towards a sort of a national average of about 5 ports per station, right? And we used to be at like about 2. And Tesla was always up here like 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and the rest of the industry was like at less than 2, right? And so I mean, it's math obviously, but overall the number of charging networks that are now building like 1 and 2 port stations is going away. Yes, there's still a lot of those mom and pop coffee shops that are putting in a single charger, but the companies that are in the business of creating a stellar national or regional charging business are moving to 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 or more. We're seeing more of these charging hubs that are oftentimes 20 or more. And so I think that's one of the really great trends that's happening, right, with these new charging 2.0 players, right? They're building stations that are going to be more reliable and be able to handle a lot more drivers, reducing that wait time and increasing confidence. If you're driving down the highway, you're going to want to go to a station that has 2 chargers or 16. Right. I
Right.
mean, it's obvious, right? Because if one of those chargers at the 2 is full and the other one's broken, you're kind of SOL, right? But if many are full and a couple are broken at a 16, you probably still have plenty of options.
Right. No, and I think that's a great call. And honestly, you go to a gas station, it's not uncommon to see one or something down
Yeah.
even.
Yeah.
And by just having 7 or 8 there, you don't even think about it. And I think that is really true about kind of the station count and improving that, because I did a decent road trip recently, and the site I went to just try. Luckily, there's a secondary, so if it was completely
Right.
down, but there were 4, and 2 of the 4 I tried didn't work. Unfortunately, I got to that third one, it finally worked. And at the same time, it's like, okay, this, I know what I'm doing. This still wasted 20 minutes. I should have just gone to the other one and been done with it. But seeing and just having that kind of ability to be more proactive and having that communication. And so I guess I'd be really interested to hear from you, Florent, around kind of what you're hearing around automakers or app developers about what they need from your API and what you can kind of share around that and how to kind of build that visibility.
I think overall, I mean, what we hear from automakers, map makers, and other industry players is one stream of data that can capture what drivers would want to see, on their side. So we are really operating as a business to business, or called data as
Yeah.
a platform, service. And so, you know, we want to provide them with, all the information that they need for them to own the UX and the UI, within their car, within their app, within their, like interface, of whatever is exposed to drivers, and that's really what they want. If if they have just part of the information, how relevant is that? If you're driving by a charging station that was not even on the app or not even, captured on the dash of your vehicle, how would you trust the information that is coming through that channel? So really what we see is that our partners want to have access to the most exhaustive and the richest data set.
And I'm kind of curious because with your data sets, they're pretty much real time. And are there requirements you have? Because I mean, this has changed quite a bit, but there's still a decent
Right.
number of DC fast chargers out there that don't really have real time status as to what if they're charging or not, or even if they're up.
Right.
Is that something if I was a CPO that had a bunch of chargers like that, how would you work with me? Would you say, I mean, is there a point where there could be a charge point operator that comes to you and there isn't value in the data, or like what are kind of the bare minimums that your team needs to make it so it's like a relevant, powerful data for the larger community, I guess?
Think there is always value in every stream of data that we see. Say that we
Yeah.
have a charge point operators coming to us and sharing their OCPI feed. They have information obviously about location, availability, pricing, things like these. But then all of a sudden, we add information around amenities. And when we talk about
Right.
amenities, we not only talk about their restaurants or bathroom, but we also give the name of the place. We give the Google rating, we give the opening hours. So, that information becomes much richer for anyone who wants to make a decision. If you're driving down, the highway, if you have to make a decision, sometime it comes down to, do we stop at In-N-Out or do we stop at McDonald's or Burger King? And so you need to have that information that the CPO does not necessarily have, in the first place. So the benefit is not only to standardize, but is also to enrich with additional data points that can be helpful for anyone who would be using the data feed.
No, that's great. And I guess we've been talking about what you look for and for people who come to you, but I guess for parent looking forward and kind of, I think
Yes.
this past year, didn't you guys have 140 million or something roughly like that of charging sessions tracked? I
Yes,
mean, that's huge. I'm kind of curious
it
where
is.
that's taking Parent next.
Yeah, it's a very good question because we've seen 104 million charging events in 2024. We're on track to see 140 to 150 million in the US only, and we're talking about fast charging public charging stations. So obviously
Yeah.
discounting the private fleet sector and discounting as well the level 2 charging networks. So where we're going is that we're going to more charging events. We're also going to richer events. So as I mentioned, amenities, safety, and other data sets will come on top of every other feed that we are getting and enriching and building up our data sets. We also made a move up north, expanding to Canada. So we established an office in Quebec earlier this year. I believe that was in March of 2025. And that's great. We have our team out there, and we're also expanding to Canada, currently covering about 75% of the fast charging public ports in Canada, and helping our North American operators to expand there with greater visibility on the market. So this is where we are at right now in terms of data. And now the focus comes toward how do we access the data? And the real-time API is going to be another channel, and we're excited to bring that to our partners.
No, that's great, Florent. Lauren, I I don't know if there's anything else you want to add. I realize we've kind of gone a little bit over our time, but I just want to say thank you to both, and obviously Gabe for coming on today. And I feel like, I mean, we only had you on a few episodes ago. I mean, we took a slight break between seasons there, Lauren, but even then, there's already so much more that's kind of happened and since we last talked. So it's always great to have you and the team on.
Yeah, great. Thanks. And I'll throw something out that, you can use or not use or put it in or whatever. But when Florent was talking about the 1 billion charging sessions in 2030, I was trying to do the math. I think that's 30. If you use a 97% uptime, that's 30 million failed charging sessions in 2030. And, that's really what we're trying, a big part of what we're trying to solve with that in-car navigation and the API and streaming that data in, right? So if you're thinking about that, right, and you're driving an EV down the highway or whatever in 2030, I mean, that's a lot of failure, right? Now, hopefully,
Yeah.
reliability is going to improve a lot between now and then, and I think it will. So hopefully, it won't be quite that many charging sessions. But really, that's sort of a way to think about the magnitude of the problem that Paren is solving, right? As Florent said, we're taking not just location data, but safety, pricing. We're going to know like the amount of lighting at charging stations and the amenities, how far it is to walk to that In-N-Out burger, right? Bathrooms, pricing and stuff, real time pricing, right? So literally, today, we're moving from a period of where the last few years people were just happy that there was a working charging station,
Right.
when they needed one. And now we're starting to see really this growth of kind of like the model we saw in the gas station business, right? Where there's a gas station on all four corners of an intersection, just like there are, in the fast food industry. And now we're starting to see that same thing, right? Because they realize, the charging networks realize that attracts more and more drivers, right? But it also brings competition, right? And as we're seeing, so we're going to provide that visibility and transparency for people to pick which of those four is the perfect location and everything for them to choose.
No, that's great to see, and definitely something that is much needed in the space. So always great to have both of you guys on. Thank you so much, and can't wait
Thank you,
to
Chase.
catch up with you next
Yeah.
time. Thanks for tuning in today to Grid Connections, where we explore the intersection of clean energy, electric vehicles, and the power grid. A big thank you to the whole Paren team, Gabe Klein, Florent Breton, and Lauren McDonald for joining us to share how Paren is building the data backbone of our electric vehicle charging future. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please share it with a colleague, fellow EV driver, or policy maker, and help us grow by leaving a positive review on your podcast app of choice. Want more insights like these in your inbox? Sign up for the Grid Connections Consulting newsletter. You can find the link in the show notes. And until next time, this is the Grid Connections podcast signing off.